patients with post-op. Like, not exactly. It's contagious disease. Yeah, Ebola. It's really right. Are those the trainings? Put it up.
Trainings?
I don't know. Trainings, someone.
Medical trainings?
Yeah. At debate.
Yeah, at least some people laugh, okay? If only more people said that. Mr. Chair, we believe it's a false impression to let doctors to be forced to die in the line of duty. And it's selfish to take with that assumption. What is the burden coming from opening government? The question that we got to pose here is that have the right to self-defense by saying no when it comes to be involved with this situation when it comes to contagious diseases. Where does this debate must take place? This debate must take place within countries that lack protective measures or lack funding when it comes to equipment that may protect them within the area. Let's say, for example, proper quarantine equipment or quarantine rooms, or the lack of vaccinations in third world countries like Liberia, or the lack, and that is the reason why that is the reason why Ebola was so easily contracted within this region. This debate cannot happen in first world countries where they have enough equipment and somehow they will survive the situation. Let's say, for example, if somebody in Europe were to somehow have the equipment to combat Spanish flu, then they can combat Spanish flu regardless. What we're going to talk about in today's debate, two arguments basically. The first argument would be, do doctors have the right to abdicate themselves when there is a clear possibility that there is harm or death in the process? This will be divided into several different levels. Second of all, I'm going to talk about how do we best ensure treatment from these doctors at the end of the day. Right. First argument, do doctors have the right? On the first level, we have to characterize the situation where doctors do not have the automatic duty to actually serve within these situations. It's a false impression that we have. We have to acknowledge that they're human beings and they have the right to self-defense because there is a limit that they can do, and we already allow them many choices on which situation they want to be placed. Let's say, for example, a person graduates from med school, he is not automatically placed into the ICRC or Doctors Without Borders, or they can even choose what specialization they want to go to do so. So if we already acknowledge that they can choose whether to be within the positions in the first place, that consent should also extend to the idea when they are already placed within these war zones. Second of all, the duty that they already pick up was a consented choice in the first place. It's not like they somehow are forced to the situation, but they have to recalibrate whether they want to become a doctor in the first place. But where does this extend to? Does it extend to the idea that they should not die within the situations? Let's look at the parallels we already have within other services. Let's say, for example, soldiers who are pacifists because of their religions. Let's say, for example, they're Mormons or they're Quakers. They can somehow say that they would like to abdicate from the draft general. And if we were to acknowledge that latent harm or that potential harm, that should also extend when it comes to doctors. In fact, when you talk about doctors, many doctors can reject the idea of abortion because it goes against their religious beliefs. So the question here, if we already allow something that is somehow that's much more psychological, why should we stop when it comes to potential harm that is much more prevalent? But the second level to this, what are the practical consequences when you disallow these doctors to have the choices in life? Firstly, is that you have paranoia in general because they do not have they have this inability to solve the problem, and somehow they come up with bad decisions and they can't do their job properly, where they constantly they can't actually focus on the situation itself because they think they can die at any moment. Second of all, the state has a monopoly over the doctor's choice. That means if somehow there's a situation when it comes to famine or war zone, and now they don't have a choice, the government can always say where exactly they need to go to, and they are forced to do so. What happens here? Three different levels. Firstly, that means they are less likely to continue the profession, and there'll be a huge decline of specialists within that situation. They are more likely to go into something like, for example, palliative care, where they don't have to actually somehow be part of situations where they have to deal with people with contagious diseases. Second of all, they are less likely people to join med school in general because the fear that they don't have the right to actually choose so. But lastly, is that there will be less volunteers for overseas work because there is no guarantee whether they can actually somehow think about the situation on the ground. So they have to recalibrate their decisions whether they want to go to Liberia or not. But if we allow this position where they can actually choose to reject certain situations, that means there will be more doctors be able to go on the ground and somehow contribute in general, because they can run away when it comes to huge when there's a huge plague within the situation. In fact, Doctors Without Borders already allow people to go home when they think that they are in huge dangers, and just like how many doctors who decide to go back from Liberia and go back to the United States and France. But before I move on to my second argument, yes.
Yeah, how are they will not impede the government policy whereby the doctors subscribe to that policy to send the doctors to the country that affected by this disease?
I'm not so sure. If you were to do volunteer work overseas, most of that is done by choice. Like, people are not forced to go to the ICRC. People register to enter the ICRC. But second question, how do we best ensure treatment from the doctors? Firstly, you have to acknowledge when doctors are in crisis areas, these people don't have a KPI to actually be to do so. The only reason why they're present is because of their altruism, and that's their only incentive when they are there. But somehow, if you take away this recalibration, that somehow they're not doing things based on altruism, there are several bad decisions that might happen. Firstly, is that doctors are more likely to give palliative care towards their patients because they think that person is going to die anyway. So if I'm forced into that situation, because resource is also scarce, then I'm more likely to give medicine that somehow relieves his pain rather than somehow cure the disease, because I might need it for certain people that are probably much more important. Second of all, is that you would have shorter consultation services because they want to get rid of the people outside of the situation and not come to him. That means less likely people are going to get medication within these war zones, and especially that is the only alternative they have. If they were to go to somewhere else, that means they have to go for private healthcare. They'll become even more expensive, especially in third world countries. But here's the third part to this. Why is it bad? It's because most of the time, when it comes to contagious diseases, people assume that specialist doctors need to be there in the first place, and they are the ones who are forced into the line of duty without actually allowing him to choose whether he should be there or not. What happens here is that when these people die in the process, you lose a doctor who can be part of a certain research on somehow taking the research for probably the vaccination for Ebola, or probably the vaccination for the Spanish flu. So when these people disappear and somehow die in the process, these people are long gone from the research chain, and somehow you have less number of doctors forced into that. It's even worse when probably that doctor has other jobs, like for example, she's also a midwife. That means within that village, then you will no longer have any midwife within that situation, and the whole village suffers practically. We have to give these doctors a chance, and we must not continue our selfish assumptions that they have to die in the line of duty. And OG provides this self-defense.
Yeah.
Right, thank you very much. I call upon first speaker of the nomination today.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, we think that today doctors should not be allowed to be given choice of whether or not should they have a choice to choose whether they want to treat patients or not. Simply because we think that before they even enter these professions, right, this is an informed choice that they've already made. This is something that you have taken into consideration before they actually choose to venture into these professions. It's something that they should have already considered, that I would have to see patients with contagious disease, and therefore it's an informed choice on doctors' behalf. And that's why we don't think that the government today should allow doctors to actually reject treatment to patients with contagious disease. Why is it so? Right? Because doctors have already, governments have already spent, right, a lot of money into giving education to these people, so that one day they will graduate from medical school to serve the people's community. And we think that therefore the doctors actually have a role in even treating this contagious disease, right? We think that when they have already taken into consideration that one day they will actually have to treat this sort of contagious patients with contagious disease, doctors have no right to later say that no, I don't want to treat you simply because you have a contagious disease, right? Because it's an informed choice, we also don't see why we should actually allow doctors this choice to reject treatments to patients with contagious disease. We believe that by not allowing doctors to have choice to actually choose whether they want to treat contagious disease, we believe that it's actually going to produce better doctors today, because it's doctors, they are people that have already taken into consideration that their line of work is indeed a dangerous one, right? You must be willing to put your life on risk for these people, right? Because this is what you do. You treat sicknesses. You could have treated regardless of whether it's a contagious sickness or not, or whether is it a sickness so horrible you have to bear the sight of a horrible, deformed patient. All of these are things that the doctors have already taken into consideration before you even choose to venture, right? Yes.
Doctors don't cure diseases by themselves. They need medical equipment, and when they make an informed choice to become a doctor, there's an understanding that they will at least have the equipment to not just cure the patient, but make themselves safe as well.
Indeed, we're not saying that we're not providing these doctors with medical equipment. If the problem today is a lack of medical equipment or a lack of safety precautions, what you should do is actually to increase the safety precautions in this country, to increase the supplies of medical equipment in this country, and not just let these people die just to protect your doctors, right? If your doctors are given the choice to choose whether they want to treat this patient, then what is a doctor there for? We don't see a reason for the existence of doctors today if you actually allow them to choose to protect themselves over patients who direly need what the government has into them to train them to be professionals, to be people who treat diseases like this. Therefore, we don't think that doctors should be given the choice to reject treatment to patients with contagious disease. We believe that this is also actually going to produce better doctors, right? Because we think that by letting these doctors know, right, that when you choose to venture into this, area, right, you should know that it's like given consent, right? It's like indirect consent given that you will treat patients like this one. Doctors will take into serious consideration whether or not are they really suitable to be doctors today, right? They'll take into serious considerations the amount of hard work and sacrifices that you need to put in to be a doctor today. Nowadays, we see that there's actually a huge, high amount of doctors that is unemployed today, simply because the Malaysian government is just simply creating doctors, right? But these doctors are so doctors that are not ready to even treat their patients, right? And how can we call people like these doctors when you don't even have the mental preparation to see patients? Like, we don't think that you're a good doctor. Essentially, we think that this form of government policies that doesn't allow you to have a choice to actually choose whether or not you want to treat contagious patients actually prepares doctor to be more ready to treat these patients, and in a sense produces better quality doctors today. Yes.
If you have proper vaccinations in first world country, then there is no debate. But the question here is that how long are we going to force these doctors in these hospitals until they die, or until they find a cure within these countries?
We don't deny the fact that doctors actually are exposed to certain risks and potential dangers in this. Every line of profession has their own danger, right? Just because there's a risk, that doesn't mean that you should immediately stop doing it, right? If building a high tower is so dangerous, should we actually stop doing it? And all of us should live in trees, right? That's not true, right? Risk is there to be taken. But we think that in this case, it's an informed risk, right? And the doctors know safety precautions that they can take. Even the most basic safety precaution of wearing gloves and not having direct contact, not having any direct body fluid contact with your patients are some of the most simplest precautions a doctor can take, even in a third world country. Therefore, we don't think that the problem here today is whether or not is there sufficient precautions, right? Because doctors are medically trained to protect themselves in the first place. They are equipped with the knowledge of how to prevent themselves from being contagious with this disease, right? And if a doctor today chooses to venture into this, we believe that doctors should not be given the choice of whether or not do they actually want to, given a choice to reject patients with contagious disease. We also believe that these patients essentially need them, right? If doctors don't treat them, right, then who's going to help these patients, right? It's essentially equivalent to saying that you're going to leave them to die here today when you actually allow doctors to just reject simply for the sake of self-protection. Doctors' line of work is one with moral code when the doctor knows that his line of work is noble and duty in the sense that he helps people in their times of worst needs, right? Therefore, we believe that doctors should not be given the choice, right? And we think that a doctor like this is more better equipped and more ready to serve his people, right? When you have actually taken into consideration the sacrifices that you need to make, we believe that you are doctors that are more dedicated to this job line. And this is the doctors that we need today in order for advancement of medical technologies to further, right? Because if you take into consideration that research in itself also has a huge risk of you getting contagious by this so-called contagious disease in the process. No doctors who have done all this research, but they have put their lives on the line to further develop cures and vaccines so that they are able to serve these people for the very purpose of actually protecting these people, right? Therefore, we think that government today should not allow doctors to actually have choice to reject treatment to patients with contagious disease. Outside opposition is proud to oppose.
Great, thank you very much. Let's call one second speaker in government. Okay.
Mr. Speaker, contrary to what side opposition would have you believe, doctors are not lifeless, choiceless foot soldiers of the state that can be sent and forced into an area of plague and caged there until somehow a cure is found in Norway, or eventually they die of the disease that they so valiantly want to protect. And the fundamental problem of the opposition's case was that they never took up or never wanted to deal with the burdens that side government rightfully proved were necessary, the burdens required to win this debate. They never told you, firstly, why the choice of the doctors to become doctors in the first place or to altruistically help other people extends to going on suicide missions to Liberia to try and help or cure people, not even cure, but even to care for people with Ebola. Secondly, she never told you why they could ensure better care for patients or better care from doctors who are necessarily not wanting to be there or too paranoid, too depressed, or too afraid to do anything. Lastly, she never told you why more dying doctors or doctors with the potential of contracting diseases would improve the containment of these contagious diseases. In my speech, I'm going to talk to you about three things. First, about doctors and whether or not they should have the right to defend themselves. Secondly, about patients and care. And lastly, I'm going to talk to you about how our side better treats diseases and reduces casualties. That's my substantive material. But before that, just one point of rebuttal that doesn't fit. She told you, hang on, doctors who go into these situations can take simple precautions like wearing gloves, like face masks, in order to prevent the spread of these diseases. Ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to things like Ebola or severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS, or swine flu, that's not the case. And that's a false sense of security that that hospitals in Liberia and in Ghana, for example, tell their young medical interns that, hey, don't worry about it. All you have to do is wear some gloves and you will contract it. That's not true. Some of these are airborne diseases. Some things like Ebola, for example, can transmit through a bodily sweat, for example, or any other forms of body fluid. It's not that simple. You can literally get disease just by sitting in the room with someone or touching them. So firstly, let's talk about doctors. The leader of opposition told you that when the doctor wants to be a doctor, he knows he's going to deal with contagious diseases anyway, so he's already made that choice. No, not necessarily. Because when a doctor makes a decision to become a doctor, it doesn't extend to self-harm or to putting yourself in harm's way. He's an individual providing a service. When a doctor decides to be a doctor, he doesn't magically think that he himself can cure all diseases. He obviously needs the help of science and medicine to cure the disease. He also knows that he is probably going to be provided with sufficient lab equipment, a quarantine room, a hazmat suit, for example, when it comes to these diseases. You cannot say that a doctor going to, like, for example, University of Cape Town to try and study medicine knows exactly that he's going to have to cure Ebola without wearing any protective gear. That is a false choice and a false decision the doctor makes. Secondly, we told you that the principle, and something she didn't deal with, is that this principle already exists. Doctors can refuse to provide things like abortion if, for example, they're a Catholic and it's against their religion. Some soldiers who are Quakers or Mormons can refuse to go to war because it's against their religious beliefs. And those are aesthetic beliefs, ladies and gentlemen. If you believe that aesthetic harm to a person's identity is sufficient reason to allow them to refuse some duty, why not practical, real-life danger when you are dealing with contagious diseases? Yes. Thirdly, we told that it deters more people from joining the medical profession. If every young high school graduate in Liberia knows that the government can force you into hospitals to deal with Ebola without you having any right to refuse, then no one's going to want to be a doctor. And especially, this is especially pertinent when we look at the Somalian civil war in the 90s. Because the United States Army were married together with USAID as well as the Red Cross, the United States Army forced the Red Cross into certain areas to treat war casualties. What happened then was that funding as well as participation for these humanitarian groups drastically fell, because no one wanted to be a charity worker in Somalia or a humanitarian worker in Somalia, because they knew that they would be forced into these areas and they had no right to refuse, because essentially the army was telling these people what to do. That's exactly what's going to happen under their model. We also think it's also important that the opportunity cost here, although we accept that some people will be refused care and may die, we think those doctors can give their expertise somewhere else. But on a second level, let's talk about patients. We told you that there are going to be doctors out there who want to help these people. There are doctors flying in from the United States, from places like Dallas. We read in the news, for example, a doctor from Dallas went to Liberia, contracted Ebola, survived Ebola, and remained in Liberia to help and fight Ebola. There are people who want to do this. We don't think that they're not going to get any help at all. But under your model, they're going to get worse help. Doctors are going to be in instances of depression as well as fear. We know that people who are depressed and who live in environments of high volatility and high pressure and fear make bad decisions. They're more likely to, for example, give you the wrong medicine or give you the wrong consultation. Secondly, the doctor is going to want to spend less time with you. If you have Ebola and you walk into his office, he's going to say, no, it's just a flu. No, it's just a cold or something. Please get out of my office. I never want to see you again. Lastly, because he's not invested and committed to this patient, he's more likely to give antibiotics or penicillin to someone else because he knows you're going to die, because he's not committed and invested to wanting to treat you. Let me move on to my substantive material. How do we better treat diseases and reduce casualties? The Leader of Opposition said they're not going to get any more help. Private help is too expensive. No one wants to come to these countries and help. Let's deal with that one by one. First, we think we incentivize more foreign medical aid under our model. Because when these doctors, for example, refuse to treat these patients, they might go on strike. They might come out in public and talk to media personnel and say, we don't want to treat them because our governments can't provide us proper medical equipment. This is likely to garner the attention of big moral actors like the United States as well as the United Kingdom to send more of these equipments, the hazmat suits, and provide quarantine services in those instances. We think that's a lot better, rather than doctors silently forced into situations and not saying anything about it. Also, secondly, doctors can use this as political ammunition against their own governments. So doctors in Liberia can come up and rally and protest against the government to say, if you want to treat Ebola, we need better, we need better lab equipment, we need better facilities. We think that's, and when doctors unionize and push the governments, especially when people are dying in these crisis areas, that's likely to get a lot of attention. Even if the governments don't change, the United States is likely to pressure some change as well. Lastly, we tell you to also make private healthcare cheaper. In Liberia and places like Guinea, for example, there's an over-reliance on public healthcare. That means people go to public hospitals, and there's so much demand for public healthcare, no one's going to private healthcare. So right now, a person with Ebola, first option, go to a government clinic. But if more and more doctors refuse to treat patients because lab equipment's not enough, it's likely to push down prices, because now there's a large demand for private healthcare, or i.e. healthcare that has proper equipment. That means the prices of private hospitals who have proper equipment, who have hazmat suits, for example, become a lot more attractive. All these doctors probably go to work in private hospitals. When there's more demand, more supply in public hospitals, private hospitals, that's likely to drive the prices down for better care as well. For all these reasons, we're proud to propose.
Right, thank you very much. Let's call on second speaker of your opposition, which
Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, so today we as a side of the opposition, we believe that we shouldn't allow the doctor to have this kind of choices, because we know that the doctor, before they enter into that career, they know that there's already a risk, they know that this is their duty to save the people. They already make an informed choice before they enroll in this kind of courses, right? So what will actually happens under that paradigm? What if we allow the doctor to make this kind of choices? So who is going to like save those people who are in the danger? Who is going to save those patients if we allow this to happen, right? Because if they're too afraid to like go to contact the patients, who is going to do the like quarantines? Like who is going to do it? This will only allow the disease to even get worse, right? So who is, because they are the first line who are in that particular countries. So they are the ones who start doing this, right? So they talk about how it will incentivize more foreign aids. But we don't think that this is not actually mutually exclusive. In our case, if your government is a responsible government, and we can always see that even if those particular countries that never, if the world know that there is the outbreak of the Ebola in the country, we already see there's all those NGO from other countries, they already will send this kind of like medical aids to the country, to that particular country, to those countries. We see that there's always the help to be given in that case. Yes.
So right now, there's like all the Liberian doctors are forced to treat patients. Some of them die, some of them don't have proper equipment. But no one can speak out against it because they can't deny or refuse to help these patients. How does the United States and the United Kingdom know about these things if they don't come out in public and refuse to treat patients?
They can always know because they already know that in that particular country, they don't have enough the equipment. So they will always sure to like give, when they know that in the third world country, they already know that there is not enough of equipment, then for sure they will send this kind of aids to that particular country. Yeah, so, okay, so let's move on to my first point, which is we think that this is a duty of the doctors. So the doctor, because the duty of the doctor is to save life, they are the group of people which is specially trained to treat diseases and save life, right? So if we allow them to do so, it's actually against their medical ethics, which is they already perform a Hippocratic oath, which is to do no harm. So we believe that under their paradigm, it's going to go against the oath, because right now, even though they are not directly killing them, but they are actually letting them, this group of people, without doing anything to like anything that they can do to help this group of people, they're actually letting this group of people dying. So because the government trusts you to like train you to be a doctor, and there are no other profession that can do this kind of jobs. This is only the specialized group which can do this. But yeah, so under our paradigm, it's like other countries, they will have the Samaritan law, because we believe that when they pass by the crime, but they didn't even report to the police, even though they don't have the specialized knowledge about that, but we will condemn them, we will put that into the court, because what's specially trained who have this kind of knowledge, but then don't want to like give this kind of help to people, then what for are we going to like have this kind of, what for are we going to have the doctor in the first place? Yeah, closing.
If having one doctor treat an Ebola patient means you have one less doctor to cure hundreds of other patients out there, are you willing to make a sacrifice?
Yes.
But under the current situation, Ebola is contagious, you know. So if we don't allow the doctor to do something, we allow the doctor to like just stay away. Like I just want to protect myself. I don't care what other people dying, even though the disease is keep on spreading, it's none of my business. So what will happen under their paradigms? So we just allow this kind of diseases to be spread without any control. Yeah. So going on to my next point is the role of the government. So why we think that the government shouldn't allow the doctor to make these kind of choices? Because the government has already heavily subsidized this group of people to like go to the courses, like the 5 years of courses, heavily subsidize them, and then in the hoping that, because we know that the healthcare is a very important parts of the countries, because it saves the people in a particular country, and but they already equipped with the knowledge. We equip them with the knowledge of what with some accidents like the outbreak of a disease happen, what you need to do, what kind of precautions, we already equip them with the knowledge. But if this group of people, they are not doing anything, so who is the ones who like do that? Yeah.
Now, if these doctors had no emotional investment with you and medical resources also scarce, wouldn't these volunteers more likely to give penny to curing your situation because you need to deserve that?
Is that, so we believe that even the palliative care is very important, right? Right now, even if any country, even though they know that the patient is dying, but we believe that we should provide them with the quality of life is very important. So the government will still give them palliative care just to like lessen their sufferings. We want to do whatever we can to help them so that they can live the world, like reduce their suffering, which we think that is the duty of the healthcare provider. So what I have already told you today is under a paradigm, we allow this kind of doctors to just because of the thing that is going to like harms their lives, then we don't think that the government should allow this kind of things to happen. That means you're allowing people to push away their responsibility in a situation that think that is going to harm their life. So we think that this is very harmful under that. Yeah. So we are the side of the opposition. We are proud to oppose.
Thank you very much. We please form the closing club for first speaker closing government era.
Mr. Speaker, in closing government, we're going to tell you one main extension work, right? And that is why doctors have a bigger responsibility to ensure their own survivability in order to treat more patients. So it's a very practical, very utilitarian approach towards this debate, right? Why doctors need to keep themselves alive first before they can even bother or even think about treating other patients, essentially. But before I go into my extension, allow me 3 points of rebuttal. Firstly, this is the main contention coming up from opening opposition, right? They told us that you need that doctors have to put themselves on the line, right? Because this is a consented choice. They opt into the medical profession, and this is a just sacrifice that they need to make. But what is the point of all of this heroism or nobility if you get yourself killed in the line of service? We think in that kind of light, you can't help anyone to begin with anyway. The leader of opposition told us that doctors have knowledge as to how to protect themselves, such as the use of sanitation, such as the use of gloves and other medical facilities and resources. But let's look at the nature of epidemics, right? Because even with medical supplies, doctors can still contract Ebola, doctors can still contract malaria, or even H1N1. We think because of the light of the epidemic crisis, because you have a lack of medical literature and there is a lack of research, considering the limited time span that this epidemic has rampaged throughout the world, we think there is a just cause and an exit ramp that you need to allow doctors in order to opt out, in order to protect themselves. We think it's a just policy because we need to realize that doctors are also individuals that need to be protected within our society, considering the noble profession and the sacrifice that they take on a daily basis that you talked about, right? But more than that, she told us on the second rebuttal, right? She said, look, it's the same risk when you're producing vaccines for research and development. But this is the contention and this is the difference, right? Obviously, it's more dangerous to operate in a third world country where you have a lack of medical facilities. We think in those situations when you lack a lot of gear, when you lack a lot of medical support, and you are also overburdened with many patients, we think all the more reason why these doctors who volunteer from Western liberal democracies should be allowed, therefore, the chance to opt out, to go back to their home countries, to receive some form of medication, to receive some form of support, right, before they enter the field once again. It's much more dangerous to operate in a third world country than obviously in a safe laboratory in Dallas, Texas, for instance. That's the distinction and why, therefore, there is a contingent urgency in that matter. Third rebuttal, she told us that it's the duty of doctors in order to save lives, and she quoted the Hippocratic Oath. For instance, yes, we understand, right? But the Hippocratic Oath is merely the conduct in which doctors always have this obligation to save lives. We think that is true and that is the case. But even when you draw parallels to other professions, for instance, like firefighters, they are always taught this most important rule, the golden rule of firefighting, is that the most important thing is to keep yourself alive. If you cannot keep yourself alive, then you cannot rescue anyone in a burning building, for instance. It's a basic principle, and we understand the health hazards of your profession, but most importantly, you need to keep yourself alive. It's as simple as that. Before I go into my extension, I would, yes.
One doctor reject to treat one patient with Ebola, while 100 more would die because they will get infected with the untreated disease, and it's while they're looking for volunteers.
No. This is the math, honey. If a doctor contracts Ebola, he is therefore unable to treat the 100 of patients that you talked about, because that doctor then has to be sent back to Dallas, Texas, or that doctor then has to be withdrawn from the field of duty, or simply the doctor just dies. We think this kind of fear that when you allow doctors to be unable to opt out from the system creates even more fear throughout the entire medical line. There is a cause of panic. But secondly, right, you reduce any form of voluntarism, and you reduce the efforts of other NGOs as well in order to enter the field, in order to help these patients or to help those who are contracted with Ebola. We think that the backlash of your policy is much more grave in this sense, right? Let's look at our extension. Why doctors have a bigger responsibility to ensure their own survival. Due to the inherent nature of being doctors, right? You have this inherent nature that you need to help patients, the tendency to also put yourself on the line or in harm's way in treating patients. But the problem with tackling epidemics or Ebola, for instance, is that you already have a very limited number of medical professionals. But if we think that if we had to, like, if we were given the choice, we would even pull doctors out who are in heavily concentrated areas of Ebola-stricken regions, right? Because we think that the incentive for doctors to stay back, to feel like they have to be there because there's not enough help, is always inherent within them. We think, therefore, it is essential and it's crucial when the situation calls for it, for states or even NGOs to pull back or to withdraw their own doctors, to ensure that in the long term, right, Mr. Speaker, and this is what closing government is offering you, that in the long term, we ensure the maximum amount of medical access to more patients. And that's the distinctive analysis that we give you under our house. Why is there a need for this opt-out clause, right? Because number one, we think that there is a need for the state to protect doctors, right? How doctors are the agents for combating the epidemic, for instance. We think secondly as well that there is a need to ensure medical accessibility to as many patients as possible. So if you do the mathematics, Mr. Speaker, you realize that we need to ensure their survivability, so that in the long run repercussions the backlash of the policy on the opposition side. Number one, you discourage much needed medical volunteers from other countries due to this panic mode that you set off, right? When you tell doctors who are volunteering, who are already on the ground, that you have no line of protection, that we do not back you up, that in the case that you need to help other Ebola-stricken victims, that is your duty, and because you opt into this voluntarism, you should not be allowed the option to opt out again. We think it's extremely hazardous. But secondly, for stay and to burden them all the more. We think you will increase their exposure to this hazardous and contagious disease, and it's something that is extremely unfair towards people who have done so much for the community already. Last but not least, Mr. Speaker, we think that it also sends out a bad message, right? Because we think that doctors will now be disallowed this element of choice and this idea of calculated risk. Why is it important then to allow autonomic rights or calculated rights for doctors. Because even in status quo, Mr. Speaker, you realize that doctors are also allowed to decide which patients they wish to save in an emergency. For instance, a patient who may have high rates of survivability towards a patient who is beyond the line of being able, beyond the line of saving already, then the doctor would then opt in the light of limited resources to save the one who is more likely to survive. These are the kinds of calculated risks and rights that we already adhere towards doctors. We think this right should extend towards the clause of opting out from extremely hazardous regions. For all those reasons, very proud to propose.
Right, thank you very much. Let's call on the first speaker of closing opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we can see that the opening government and closing government is actually being unfair in treating patients or being unfair towards the public interest that we have in medical in the medical field nowadays, Mr. Speaker. But before we move on onto the case of the closing opposition, let's take a look on what is actually the unfair matter. First, now that the doctors have the right to choose whether or not to treat the patient because of their lack of equipment by the government, the patient are left to die just because they are unlikely to die. Even euthanasia in this matter is actually will be condemned. Why we must actually uphold the rights of the doctor to not treat this patient just because they are unlikely to die. And second, lack of local doctors against the overpopulation of the patient that have been affected by the disease. First, we have to look into the place setting that they have this that they set up. They open the case in countries that have lack of acumen. So we can assume that this kind of lack of acumen can actually lead to lack of medical professionals. When we have this kind of problem, we could actually say that these people or this lack of doctors could not cope with the number of patients that have been infected with this contagious disease. Why they must suffer and why they must suffer and wait for the volunteer to come to their place? Because we all in the future we also have the problem whereby this kind of volunteerism works by the RCRC will face the problem of delayness and whatnot. Mr. Speaker, sit down. And these patients will actually have to die in vain, because even if they are being infected with the disease that is actually might end up die in the future, but they have the right to be treated first, Mr. Speaker. So when this